Hello humans, I am the Black Cat and welcome to Weird Wednesday. So last week I told you about Mrs. Morrison's ghost, a well-known story about a time slip. So this week I thought I would talk about a few other stories of time slips, but instead of just looking at one story, we'll be looking at a few short stories. An online post was made by a man named Ryan Bratton. He claims that one day he was sitting in his yard with a friend when something very strange happened. This is what he wrote. This happened when I was about 8. My friend and I were sitting in his yard while some kids rode their bikes down a downhill driveway. A car came down the road and stopped at a house. A kid got out and ran inside making noises that kids around his age make. Then a girl rode her bike down the driveway. A couple of minutes after this happened, the same car went down the road, stopped at the house, and the same kid got out of the car and ran inside, screaming the exact same things he'd been saying. Then the girl went down the hill on her bike again. I looked over at my friend. He said he had no idea what had just happened. In 1971, in Oklahoma, 3 guys named Carl, Mark, and Gordon, who worked for a cattle feed distributor, were sent to a remote area to pick up a feeder. So Carl says, "We opened the gate, which was barbed wire with no lock, and entered. We went on the property, which was covered in grass, up to and over the hood of the truck. They drove through the grass to the tank that sat close to a red barn. We realized the tank was almost half full and too heavy to load," Carl said. "We decided to leave and drove around the red barn, and we saw a large 2-story white house. The trio drove back to the cattle feed company, and the boss said he'd drain the tank and they could pick it up tomorrow. So they went back to the location the next day to retrieve the tank. This time, we decided to go through the old white house on the hill and brought our shotguns. They drove onto the property over the same path they had made the day before and loaded the tank. Then they pulled around to the barn towards the house. However, it was no longer there," Carl said. "We walked up the hill where it stood and there were no signs of demolition or no foundation, nothing at all. What we all seemed to witness the night before was no longer there. We have talked to each other over the years, but none of us can begin to explain this vision." In 2003, in Springfield, Missouri, a man named Jake Kell went to a petrol station. After he filled up his car, he went to pay for it. As he was leaving the shop, a large man yelled out to him, "What year is it?" This is Jake's story in his own words. "I went in to pay for the gas. The humidity made me weak, so I wanted to pay for the gas and leave. As I left the station, some large, melon-headed man dressed in a business suit yelled, 'What year is it?' The man was 6'7", he said. He could have been taller. The melon-headed man stood in front of the store at a spot Jake would have noticed when he walked out of the parking lot, but he didn't. The man wore a dark suit with a rough fiber texture," Jake said, "along the lines of things Teddy Roosevelt would wear. 'What year is it?' the man yelled again. Jake described the man as being white, around 35 to 40 years old. He wasn't tall. He was big, not too thin but not fat. He was just a big man who was acting strange," Jake said. "He was clean-shaven, no mustache or beard. He just looked like an average tall American. If you saw him in a large group of people, you would just think he's tall." So Jake answered 2003. The man's face contorted in anger. "What year is it?" he screamed at Jake. Again, I said, 2003. I started to get ticked off. The man screamed again. "What year is it?" I said it's 2003, so he could hear me. Then he quit asking. Jake tried to ignore the man and got back into his car. I said to myself, "Is this guy an alien?" He looked back to get another look at the man, but the man was gone. "He disappeared from in front of the gas station," he said. "The only place the man could have gone that quickly was inside the store, but when he looked, the man wasn't there. When it happened, I thought nothing of it," Jake said. "It's only afterwards that I happened to listen to the radio where I heard about a time traveler sighting by a truck driver in Texas at a truck stop that someone kept asking, 'What year is it?' to the truck driver. The driver was annoyed and left." Woolwich Foot Tunnel, closed for repairs in 2011. When contractors went into the tunnels to begin their work, they did so expecting it to be a fairly quick job, and it wasn't expected to take more than a few months at most. However, the tunnel was supposedly be closed for more than a year and a half. a delay which baffled residents of the area. Talking to the workers who had been down there started to paint a very strange picture. The workers in the tunnel began reporting having experienced strange time anomalies while working through the tunnel, such as working in the tunnel for hours only to emerge back into daylight to discover that only a few minutes had actually passed, or walking through the tunnel to find the trip had taken far less time than it should have. One worker of the tunnel told of a strange experience he had, and this is his story. I was one of the first ones to experience it. We were working from both ends, as it were, and had tents on both sides of the river. It was pretty basic. If you wanted something from the other side, you just had to walk through the tunnel. Anyway, the foreman on the other side radioed to ask me across. So I walked through the tunnel, the long walk we called it, and it's slightly spooky because there's no one down there. They're all working on the lift shafts. And I get to the other side, find the foreman, and his eyes nearly pop out of his head. He says he only radioed like a minute ago, and how did I get there so quick? He wouldn't take my word for it that I walked. Reckoned I had a buggy down there or something, that it was some kind of prank. But I stand my ground and he starts to see I'm not lying. Anyway, he forgets what he called me there for. He gives me his big red plastic box, tells me to walk back over and hold it up for him when I get to the other side. So I head back down, the lonely walk back, thinking, shouldn't we be getting on with some work? When I get to the top, I wave the red box in the air and radio the foreman. You just left me, he's saying. No more than a minute ago. That's when I start to feel a bit weird. Another worker commented saying, my initial feelings was I was pretty freaked out by it all. But once everyone else had experienced it, it was amazing how quickly it seemed normal. It became like a joke. It was a laugh. You know, a sort of giggles. Someone said we'd invented a teleporter and we're all going to be rich. The foreman stopped trusting watches and phones when we were down there and took to using egg timers. A few of the young agency lads tried to claim extra on their timesheets. That was the thing though. Time froze when you were down there. So if you were down there for a full working day fixing the tiling, you basically finish work, come back up, and it would still be morning. One thing we couldn't get our head around was how the two sort of time places a guy was in seemed to be happening at the same time, as it were. Like, I see you emerge across the river in no time at all, but there's also a you who reckons he's spending 4 hours in the tunnel. Some workers apparently tested out their theory that time was actually stopping for them by camping out for a whole 3 days down in a dark tunnel. When they finally emerged into the outside world, it was claimed that the day and time was exactly the same as when they had first gone into the dark to begin their experiment. In another experiment, one worker named Peter tied a rope around his waist as others held onto the other end. The idea was for him to walk through the tunnel with the rope and then signal to the others with a red flag when he got to the other side that he had crossed, after which the other workers would shout out to the ones holding the rope that he had crossed and then pull on the rope. It seemed like pretty standard, even silly bit of experimentation and fooling around. But things would apparently get very weird very fast. One of the people holding the rope said, I'm kneeling down and craning my head down so I can watch Peter walk around the curve. The tunnel bends in an inverted bow underground. He laughs and waves at me for a minute, then gets bored and keeps walking. And he's just about to round the curve, out of sight. It hasn't been long, just a minute or so, around the same time it took us to walk down the steps. And I feel the rope around me tighten. Then I hear lads up top. He's across, waving a red flag. The thing is, Peter hears it too, and he stops, turns around, and he's looking at me, his hand slowly reaching into his big jacket pocket, and he pulls out the edge of this large red flag. For a moment I grin. I reckon they're all having me on, but it's the look on his face. That's what still haunts me. Nobody's that good an actor. His face, and he's a big man, mind you, fearless. Oh, Peter was a big character, always at the center of things, always with a big smile. Never saw him take anything too serious in all our days, until then. But I don't know how to describe it. It was fear, just plain fear on his face. And he's looking right at me and I know what he's thinking. I know what he's trying to figure out. Do I keep going or do I come back? He takes one step toward me, then stops. I don't know how long we looked at each other like that, neither of us talking. Then in the end, he turns around again and carries on, out of sight. Well, I'm up those stairs like a shot, and then I get there, across the river, unmistakable even from that distance. Red flag in one hand, another guy's arm around his shoulders. Anyway, I didn't like that. That freaked me out, that did. Those were some interesting stories. The last story was definitely really creepy. It's certainly interesting the thought about what this means. Is it possible to travel through time willingly? Can you just slip into a different time without control? What if you get stuck? What would have happened if the worker in the last story turned around and decided to go back out the way he came in? Would there be two of him, or would the guy on the other side disappear? But anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts. I'd be interested to hear different perspectives, and I'll catch you next time. Bye! The workers in the tunnel allegedly began to report having experienced strange time anomalies.